Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story.
The first thing I noticed was the wrapping paper, neon pink with giant silver stars. Nobody wrapped presents like that except my sister Caitlin. She always thought bigger was better, louder was funnier. In a municipal tax enforcement office, the package looked like a misplaced joke. I was halfway through peeling the address label to toss it when Mr. Darrow appeared in my peripheral vision. Our department chief never just appeared. He was the kind of man you heard coming, heavy shoes, heavy presents. But this time, he was silent. "Who delivered that?" he asked. His tone wasn't casual. "A courier just dropped it," I said, holding it up. "From my sister." He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the return label. "Turn it around." I did, frowning. In Caitlin's messy looped handwriting, right below her name and address, she'd written a phrase, 4 words that made my stomach tighten. It was an old inside joke from when we were kids, the kind we'd scrawl on birthday cards and scrap paper. Mr. Darrow's expression went flat. "Set it down." "Now." I froze. "It's from my sister. Set it down." His voice had that edge we all knew better than to challenge. He reached for the desk phone and hit a speed dial. "Evidence control. This is Darrow. I've got a package flagged on the watch list. Phrase matches a level 2 trigger code. Need immediate pickup." That's when it clicked, the federal tax fraud watch list. We'd sat through training on it last year. A list of suspicious phrases used to mask illicit communications. And somehow, Caitlin had nailed one word for word. My chair scraped back. "Sir, it's a joke." She wouldn't. "Protocol doesn't care about intent." He cut in. "It's logged now." The air in the workroom shifted, keys stopped clacking, heads turned. 2 men from evidence control came in with gloves and a steel case. Without ceremony, they slid the package inside and sealed it. I stood there, useless, while they signed the chain of custody form. The neon paper looked absurd under the harsh overhead lights, like a clown at a funeral. Mr. Darrow turned to me. "You know I have to remove you from the floor until this is cleared." I nodded, throat tight. He wasn't asking. He gestured toward the hallway, and I walked past my coworkers, aware of every pair of eyes on me. In the corridor, the sound of the steel case locking echoed in my head. I'd handled fraud evidence before, but never with my name on the delivery log. And never with my sister's handwriting staring back at me. Thanksgiving at my parents' place always smelled like roasted turkey and barely concealed competition. This year was no different, except Caitlin was already holding court before I even got my coat off. She was halfway through a story about some viral ad campaign her team had pulled off, complete with hand gestures big enough to hit the gravy boat. And then the client called me personally to say it was the most engagement they'd ever seen, she said, grinning like she'd just won a Pulitzer. Dad leaned back in his chair, his bare belly stretching the buttons on his shirt. "Now that's what I call real-world impact," he said, pointing at her like she was the mayor. I slid into my seat, keeping my tone even. "Funny you say that. Last month, we shut down a property tax evasion scheme worth just over $3 million. I waited for someone to react. It was tied to a chain of shell companies across 3 states. Took 6 months to unravel. Blank stares. Caitlin tilted her head like she was trying to remember if she'd seen it on the news. Dad glanced at me, smiled thinly, and said, "That's nice," before turning back to Caitlin. "So, tell me more about this award thing you mentioned." I felt my fork scrape the plate a little too hard. Caitlin launched into a play-by-play of her acceptance speech, complete with a reenactment of the applause. Mom laughed in the right places, nodding like she'd been in the front row. I tried again. The case was complicated, had to coordinate with federal auditors, trace transactions through encrypted ledgers. Mom was already reaching for the mashed potatoes. "Honey, pass me the peas," she said to Caitlin. The rest of dinner was just noise. Caitlin talking about influencer partnerships. My uncle asking her if she'd met anyone famous. Dad throwing in lines like, "You should write a book," and "That's the kind of work people notice." I sat there chewing dry turkey and thinking about all the other times this had happened. High school, full ride scholarship. They'd said, "That's great," and moved on to my cousin's new boyfriend. College, top of my class. Dad had asked if my major would get me a real job. First commendation from the department? Caitlin's Etsy shop had gone global that week, so naturally, that was the headline. Even when I made senior investigator, the youngest in our division, Dad's only comment was, "At least it's stable." That night, after dessert, Caitlin pulled out her phone to show Dad a photo of her on a panel. He turned the screen toward Mom. "Look at our girl, up there with the big shots." I could have told them about the commendation letter from the mayor's office sitting in my desk drawer. But I didn't. Because the truth was already loud enough in that room. In every polite, "That's nice," every time my work got filed under boring desk job. I wasn't the one they bragged about. I was the one they tolerated. When we said our goodbyes, Dad hugged Caitlin tight and told her he was proud. To me, he just said, "Drive safe." On the way home, the streetlights blurred in the cold. I thought about how in my world, a $3 million case was worth headlines, but in theirs, it wasn't worth a second helping of attention. And I knew, not for the first time, that in this family, my wins were never going to be enough. The elevator to the investigative wing required a key card and a code, and even then it stopped halfway down so the cameras could get a clean read of your face. I'd been walking through those doors for years, but I still felt that low hum in my chest every time the lock clicked open. The main floor of municipal tax enforcement was the public side, cubicles, forms, long counters where citizens came to argue about late payments. Down here was where the rail work happened. No windows. No unescorted visitors. Everything was locked file rooms, servers, even the copy machines. Past the security checkpoint, the air smelled faintly of coffee and ozone from the servers. Along one wall, the forensic accounting lab was sealed behind glass. Inside, two analysts sat at dual monitor setups, screens glowing with endless rows of numbers. You learn to read those numbers like a second language, spotting patterns, anomalies, the financial equivalent of a fingerprint. My own office was smaller than the tech labs, but stocked with the tools I needed: access to the secure database, transaction tracing software, and the city's property transfer registry going back 40 years. You could take a random address and, in less than a minute, map every owner, lien, and tax record tied to it. And if something didn't add up, you kept digging until you found the break in the chain. A few months back, that digging turned into one of our biggest cases in years. On paper, it was nothing, a routine audit flagging an undervalued property sale. But when I pulled the transaction history, the same LLC kept popping up, transferring ownership between different shell companies at suspiciously low amounts. It was like watching someone launder money in plain sight. I spent weeks chasing those paper trails, cross-referencing corporate filings, even pulling archived deeds from microfilm. Every time the trail looked cold, another lead would spark: a misspelled corporate name, a transfer filed one day before a lien expired, a sudden change in mailing address to a P.O. box 3 counties over. By the time I was done, we had them dead to rights, a shell network moving millions through fake property deals to wash illicit funds. Mr. Darrow called me into his office the morning the case closed. He was standing by the window, arms crossed, with that rare expression that meant something had impressed him. "You see what no one else sees," he said. Half the department would have written that off as a clerical error. I shrugged, though inside I felt the sharp pulse of satisfaction. Details don't lie. People do. He cracked a smile. "You just saved the city more than $3 million in lost tax revenue. That's not nothing." Hearing that from him mattered. More than it should have. Because I knew if I told my family, it would land with the same thud as every other accomplishment. Caitlin could announce she'd gotten 100 new followers and Dad would treat it like breaking news. I could talk about protecting the city's financial integrity, and they'd hear boring desk job. That was the quiet divide I'd learned to live with. Down here, my work had weight. Out there, it barely existed. And I understood, with a certainty that sat heavy in my chest, that even if they knew the full scope of what I did, the cases, the stakes, the skill it took, it still wouldn't shine the way Caitlin's public applause did in their eyes. I called my mom the night after Thanksgiving, still irritated enough that I didn't bother with small talk. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" Her voice was syrupy, the same tone she used when she was about to pat me on the head verbally. I didn't ease into it. Did you notice how no one cared about the case I brought up last night? I'm not talking about a parking ticket. I'm talking about shutting down a multi-million-dollar tax evasion scheme. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the click of her turning down the TV. Sweetheart, it's not that we don't care. It's just, Caitlin's work is more visible. People understand marketing campaigns. They see billboards, commercials. It's exciting. I felt my jaw clench. And mine's what? Invisible. She gave a light laugh, the kind she used to brush off a serious point. No. Yours is just stable and safe. You've always been good at that. Stable and safe. I heard the rest of the sentence she didn't say, boring, unremarkable, nothing to brag about. So what you're saying is Caitlin gets celebrated because her work makes for good dinner conversation, and mine doesn't. That's not fair, she said quickly. It's just different. She works with people. You work with numbers. Numbers. Like all the people behind those numbers didn't matter. Like protecting millions in taxpayer money wasn't worth as much as a flashy ad campaign. Do you have any idea what my day actually looks like? I asked. She sighed. Honey, I don't need to know all the details. As long as you're happy and secure, that's what matters. There it was, the quiet dismissal, wrapped in fake concern. I could have hung up right then, but I wanted to hear if she'd even try to understand. You realize I've been doing this for years, right? Awards, commendations, none of it lands with you because you can't post a picture of it on Facebook. That's not true, she said, but it was weak, like even she didn't believe it. We're proud of you in our own way. I let out a dry laugh. Your own way doesn't look much different from ignoring it altogether. Her voice sharpened. Don't start making this about favoritism. We love you both equally. Love isn't the question, I said. It's respect. Another pause. Then the placating tone was back. You're overthinking this. Caitlin's work just happens to be the kind people notice. Yours is steady, and that's a good thing. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight. Right then, I realized she wasn't going to get it, not now, not ever. She didn't want to understand my world. She was comfortable keeping me in the category she'd built years ago, the quiet one with a safe job who didn't need applause. So I stopped pushing. Okay, Mom, I said flatly. Good. I'm glad we talked, she said, as if that was closure. When we hung up, I knew I was done trying to earn their approval outside of work. They didn't want to see me, not really. And that was fine. I'd keep my personal life and my professional life separate. At least, that had been the plan until Caitlin's package landed on my desk. Mr. Darrow shut the conference room door and didn't sit. That was never a good sign. The flagged phrase wasn't just a random hit, he said. Combined with your department as the destination, it triggered Operation Ledger Lock. That name hit like a weight. Ledger Lock was the big one, the automatic system that froze everything until a full investigation was opened. No exceptions. I kept my arms crossed. It was an inside joke. My sister, I don't care if it was a nursery rhyme, he cut in. That code phrase is in active use by a fraud ring we've been tracking for 18 months. You know the rules. We treat every one of these as credible until proven otherwise. He walked around the table, stopped across from me, and lowered his voice. I can make this disappear. Classify it as a non-credible domestic incident. Bury it in a folder no one will ever open again. You and your sister walk away untouched. The offer sat between us like a loaded weapon. All I had to do was nod, and this would vanish. No paperwork, no questions, no blowback. But I saw her face in my head, Caitlin at Thanksgiving, basking in Dad's applause, smiling while my own work evaporated into the background. And I thought about the fact that she'd sent this package without a single thought for where I worked or what might happen. Run it by the book, I said. His eyebrows ticked up. You're sure? Positive. He studied me for a second, then nodded once. All right. You're recused from field interviews, but you can handle the file. Start with the preliminary record. I sat at the terminal in the secure lab, the cursor blinking in the subject name field. My fingers hovered before I typed, Caitlin Barrett. The intake form asked for known aliases, so I added her old username from college, plus the one she used for her freelance marketing work. For known associations, I left it blank for now. That part would come later. Next was digital footprint. I pulled her public social media and started combing. There she was on Instagram last month, holding a cocktail and captioning it, celebrating my little debt collector sister finally visiting the big city. Another post from earlier in the year, tax girl hard at work while I'm out making deals. I tagged both. Not because they were threatening, they weren't, but because they told me what I already knew. She'd been using me as a punchline for years. An hour in, I had her file seeded with every relevant post, address, contact, and piece of identifying data I could find. It was clinical, methodical, and exactly how I treated any other subject. When I was done, I locked the file and sat back. Somewhere upstairs, the chain of custody on her package was moving through its next step. And soon enough, she was going to get a very different kind of attention than she was used to. They brought her in through the side entrance, the one we used for sensitive interviews. No cuffs, she wasn't under arrest, but the two municipal security officers flanking her made the message clear. Caitlin looked annoyed, not scared. She glanced around the hallway like she was expecting a surprise party. When they led her into the interview room, I stayed back behind the observation glass. The room was bare, gray table, for metal chairs, camera in the corner. No clock, no wall art, just the hum of the air vent. She sat, crossed one leg over the other, and started scrolling on her phone until the guard told her to hand it over. She rolled her eyes, dropped it on the table, and leaned back. Okay, let's get this over with. I've got calls this afternoon. They left her alone. That's standard. Give someone a few minutes with nothing but their thoughts. At first, she drummed her fingers, hummed a little. But by the 8-minute mark, the stillness started to eat at her. She shifted in her chair, checked the door. When Mr. Darrow finally walked in, he didn't bother with a greeting. He dropped a slim case folder on the table and sat across from her. Caitlin Barrett, he said, his tone flat. Do you know why you're here? She smirked. Because somebody's got way too much time on their hands. I sent my sister a package, and apparently that's now a crime. He didn't smile. The package you sent contained language that matches a phrase used by an organized tax fraud network. That phrase is on a federal watch list. She blinked like he'd just spoken another language. It was a joke. You can ask my sister. We've been saying that since we were kids. I'm not here for jokes, he said, flipping open the file. I'm here to determine intent and possible connections to illicit entities. So let's start with how you came to use that phrase on a package addressed to a municipal tax enforcement office. Caitlin laughed, sharp and defensive. Intent? Are you serious? I was sending her a gift. Do you guys seriously think I'm some criminal mastermind? Darrow ignored the outburst. Who else have you used that phrase with in the last year? Her smile wavered. I don't know. Friends, maybe. It's just a thing I say sometimes. He wrote something in his notes without looking up. Names. She shook her head. No way. This is ridiculous. Just bring my sister in here. She'll clear it up in 2 seconds. That's not how this works, he said. His voice stayed level, but there was no give in it. Do you conduct business with anyone who's ever been investigated for tax fraud, money laundering, or unlicensed financial activity? She leaned back again, folding her arms. I work in marketing. I don't exactly run background checks on clients before I sell them ad space. That's not a no, he said. Her jaw tightened. Look, I know you're just doing your job, but this is insane. You're wasting taxpayer money on me when there are actual criminals out there. Darrow closed the file slowly. That's exactly why we investigate everyone. By then, the shift in her posture was obvious, less cocky, more tense. She glanced at the door again, like she was starting to realize this wasn't going to end with a quick laugh and a handshake. And she still didn't know the part that would hit her the hardest. That was coming next. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, uniform crisp, case file in my hand. Caitlin's head jerked up. Finally, she said, leaning forward like I was there to bail her out. Can you tell him this is ridiculous? I didn't answer her. I walked to Mr. Darrow's side and set the file down, opening it to the first page. Subject, Caitlin Barrett. Questioning initiated at 14:22 hours regarding flagged language in interstate correspondence. Her brow furrowed. Subject. She let out a laugh that didn't sound confident anymore. You're really going to do this in front of him? I kept my voice steady, the same tone I used with every suspect. The phrase you wrote on the package is an active recognition code used by a financial fraud ring currently under investigation. That phrase has been tied to money laundering, shell corporations, and staged property transfers. That's insane, she snapped. It's a joke. Between us. I flipped a page, slid a printed screenshot toward her. 3 weeks ago, you used the same phrase in a public post. That post was interacted with by 2 individuals already on a federal watch list. Do you know them? Her eyes darted to the paper, then back to me. No, I don't. Those are just followers. I don't control who clicks like on something. Mr. Darrow spoke for the first time since I walked in. Because of your package, a major undercover operation had to be suspended. We had to move resources, pull personnel, and risk exposure of ongoing cases. Caitlin turned back to me, her voice edging toward panic. You work here. You know I'm not involved in any of that. Tell him. I didn't move. My job isn't to tell him you're innocent. My job is to document facts, assess connections, and determine if there's intent. That's the process. And you triggered it. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked between us like she was trying to find an angle. So what, you're just going to treat me like some random criminal? Yes, I said simply. Because in this room, you're the subject of an active fraud investigation. Not my sister. The silence after that stretched. I could see the shift in her, the realization that this wasn't a game, that my uniform meant more than she'd ever thought. Mr. Darrow closed the file. Ms. Barrett, you're not under arrest at this time, but the next steps depend entirely on your cooperation. I suggest you take this seriously. She nodded, barely, her earlier bravado stripped down to something closer to fear. For the first time in a long time, I knew she was seeing me clearly. She was pale when they walked her out, clutching a manila envelope like it might keep her upright. Inside was everything she'd earned today, the cease and desist order, the formal warning, the non-disclosure agreement. I was in the main hallway with 2 analysts, going over leads on an unrelated property scam. We were talking fast, trading numbers and dates, when I caught her out of the corner of my eye. She slowed when she saw me, hesitating like she wasn't sure if she should come closer. Then she did. Can we? She started. I met her eyes for just long enough to give a small nod. Not an invitation. A dismissal. Her mouth stayed open for half a second before she shut it, pressing the envelope tighter to her chest. I turned back to my team. If that dummy corporation's mailing address matches the one from the August file, we've got them. Pull it up when we get back downstairs. We walked past her without breaking stride. My badge hit the scanner at the secured door, the lock clicked, and the hallway was gone behind me. In the elevator, one of the analysts asked, "Friend of yours?" No, I said, eyes on the floor display. Subject from this morning. When the doors opened to the investigative wing, the noise of our world swallowed us back up, keyboards, printers, phones ringing with the next case. I didn't look back. By the time Caitlin stepped out of the building, I was already deep into the next problem that actually mattered. 6 months later, I was standing at the front of the municipal training center, a stack of case files at my side and 20 fresh recruits staring back at me. This one's from last year, I said, pulling a redacted folder from the pile. The sender thought they were being funny. They weren't. The details on the screen behind me were scrubbed, no names, no identifying photos, just the timeline, the flagged phrase, the chain of events. Package arrives at our office. Return label includes a recognition code used by an active fraud ring. Protocol triggers Operation Ledger Lock. That's it, no excuses, no personal connections, no one-off jokes. A trainee in the front row raised his hand. What if you know the person? Like, personally know them. I looked right at him. Especially then. The rule is simple. You treat every incident as credible until proven otherwise. Personal connections make people sloppy. Sloppy gets people hurt. I clicked to the next slide, showing a chart of diverted resources and suspended ops. Because of that one package, We had to pull 2 undercover agents and delay a seizure order on an unrelated case. That kind of disruption costs more than money, it costs momentum. From the corner of the room, Mr. Darrow leaned against the wall, arms folded. When I finished the case breakdown, he spoke up. This is why Investigator Barrett runs this module. She took something most people would have buried and turned it into a lesson that's going to save you from making the same mistake. A murmur of acknowledgement moved through the group. I closed the file, slid it back onto the stack. You're here to protect the integrity of the system, I told them. That means you don't flinch, you don't hesitate, and you sure as hell don't bend the rules for someone just because you shared a Thanksgiving table once. When the session ended, the recruits filed out, some glancing at me with the same respect I'd once chased in my own family. The difference was, here, I didn't have to chase it. They understood the stakes. They understood me. And walking out of that room, I realized I didn't need anyone else's validation to know exactly what I was worth. A few weeks later, her name showed up in my inbox. The subject line read, "I owe you an apology." I clicked it open. The first paragraph was a mess of run-on sentences about how unfair it had all been, how the stress had kept her up at night, how she lost clients because of the overreaction. The second paragraph tried to turn it into a shared wound. We're both victims of a system that takes things too far. By the third, it was clear what this was. Not an apology, a performance. Every sentence bent back toward her own suffering, every word a reminder that she still couldn't see past herself. I didn't finish it. I archived the email and closed the tab. On my desk, the new case file was already waiting, forged transfer deeds, a string of dummy LLCs, a trail leading into a downtown high-rise I knew well. I opened the first document and started reading, my focus shifting instantly to the numbers, the names, the patterns that would unravel the whole thing. Caitlin once thought she knew who I was, the quiet one, the safe one, the one with the boring desk job. Now she knows exactly who I've become.